Okay, good evening. Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful evening. My name is Lee Bo-hyung, and I'm the director of the Center for Hmong Studies. If some of you may have visited us already, some of you, if you have not, I encourage you to come and visit us. At the end of this month, we will have a brand new exhibit at the Center for Hmong Studies. We'll be documenting the changes in textiles within the Hmong American community within the last 35 years. So, but we have a Vang.m4v exhibit that's still up. It's been up for about a year now. We wanted to take it down, but other people said, no, we still want to come through. And so, since the exhibit was up, over 2,000 people visited and looked at the pictures. So we started to take it down slowly, and but if you still want to see possible pictures of your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, feel free to come and visit us at the center. We're open from 9 to 5. So, but make sure you send an email, since I'm the only one that's working here now. So make sure I'm there and not in class. We've had some people that stopped by and the door was locked. So I encourage you to come and visit us if you have not done so. Another thing I wanted to acknowledge Dr. Host, the president of Concordia University, St. Paul. As you all know, he's retiring, and we just recently elected a new president that's come on board on July 1st. June 1st. Oh, that's sooner than I thought. June 1st, but Dr. Host has been here for about 20 years, and without Dr. Host, we probably wouldn't have had all of these Hmong-related programs here at Concordia University. So I wanted to acknowledge that and just want to thank you for your leadership. And I don't know, maybe this will be the last public events that we'll see Dr. Host. Hopefully not. Between now and then, maybe we'll have some other lectures. But Dr. Host, thank you very much for being here tonight. And then on to announcements. Some of you a lot of people have asked about the 4th International Conference of Hmong Studies. We actually identified a date already, and that is March 30th and 31st, 2012. So 30th and 31st of 2012. So put that down on your calendar. We'll go on our website. We have a flyer over there that make sure you pick it up. We're going to be sending out a call for paper soon. So encourage your professors to submit papers, or if you're in graduate school, feel free to submit the papers as well. Last year we've only accepted half of the papers that were submitted. I anticipate that this year we'll probably say no to a lot more people as well. We don't want to do that, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing because that means that people are interested in it. But there were a lot of good papers, and we just couldn't accommodate all of them. I mean, that's the challenge. But it's a wonderful thing to see so many submissions. I want to also acknowledge other Concordia people in the room. We have Dr. Paul Helmer, of course, an author in his own right as well. And if you haven't picked up his book, History of a People, right? I mean, I always get this wrong. A history of the Hmong, right? I'm always get stuck in that piece. And then we have Professor Sally Bass here as well from the College of Education. We have lots of Concordia students and former alumni here as well as other scholars in the audience. So thank you for being here. This year, unfortunately, we've lost one of our great hero and a great leader within the Hmong community, and that's General Vang.m4v. And so a couple of months ago, we've launched a project to do a documentary on the Hmong people revolving around General Vang.m4v. And so some of the folks at H&D saw us interviewing people, taping people at the funeral, taking people at the vigil, and they said, can you guys put a tribute together for the Hmong National Development Conference? And so we did one, actually more Lee with Golden Path Entertainment put that together. And so our partner, the Center for Hmong Studies, Golden Path, entertainment and also New Age home entertainment were collaborating together to work on this maybe a year or two to do a formal documentary on, from our perspective, and I think it's very relevant to even what Dr. Chia, her talk is today. Her talk tonight. Majority of the books and articles written about the Hmong people are actually written from non-Hmong scholars. Scholars who are not Hmong. I don't know how to say that, but scholars who are not Hmong. And so we felt that, perhaps it would be fitting for us to talk to people who served with General Hong Pao, who worked with General Hong Pao, and to hear from their perspective about our migrations, our community in Diaspora, and so on and so forth. So we're gonna preview a little bit about what we've done. And again, Mua Lee, you may have seen a lot of his movie, Banya Tsamong, Golingnia, Dalao. He is well trained and well versed in this field. He's done a really good job of putting this piece together. So the credit is to him. They're the professional. I can just identify the people and say, go into that guy, into that guy, into that guy. So let's open the Center for Hmong Studies 5 years ago, along with Dr. Yung Dao. So he's visited the center numerous times already, and again, a person that's demonstrated leadership for all of us. Anyways, now on to our program as to why you're here tonight. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chia Youyee Vang, and I wanted to claim she is my cousin. So proud that she's my cousin. And she's a Minnesotan. Her family's one of the first families to settle here in Minnesota. And so it's that family that brought all of us, all of you who are Hmong to move to Minnesota. And so Dr. Vang again grew up in St. Paul, and she completed her doctorate degree in American Studies from the University of Minnesota in 2006. And she is currently an assistant professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She started a Hmong certificate program at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee as well. And this is your second book that you published. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Chia Youyee.
That the feeling is mutual, Lipa. It's good to be your cousin too. And thank you all for coming. I know many of you, I see some familiar face, and then some I don't know yet, but I hope to know. I love coming back to Minnesota because I do have many friends here. I don't think too many enemies. I think mostly friends. I don't see any enemies here, right? But thank you so much for coming. And as Li Pao gets that going, I just want to say how honored I am to be here. Li Pao is right, this is my second book, but it's a very different type of book from the first one, because the first one was commissioned by the Minnesota Historical Society Press, so it's written for a general audience. I took bits and pieces from my dissertation and research that I was conducting at the time, but it's a different book. The academic press world has its own criteria and expectations for you to prove that you know what you're doing, and if you succeed, then in the end you convince many people that you are you actually think you know what you're doing. So you make them believe that you think you know what you're doing. So then you get your book published. So it's a very interesting process that I've gone through. What I hope to do is not to, I know that many of you here are students. It seems you are younger than I am. Sometimes it's sad to think that I am now an elder, especially in our field of Hmong studies. I mean, we have others like, mentor Dr. Bruce Downing, who is very instrumental here in Minnesota in getting Hmong studies or Southeast Asian studies going in the late 70s to early 80s. I know that any of you who go and research about Hmong or Southeast Asians, you will run across works that he and his colleagues conducted in the early years. So no one can really study about the history of Hmong or Southeast Asians without running into those works. So again, those are big steps for those of us who are younger to follow. So I am so glad to see him here today. And many of you as well, my friend and colleague Paul Hilmer, whose book came out. I'm not going to say the title because Lee Pao just kind of butchered it. So, but history of a people, right? Yeah, a people's history of the Hmong. Okay, so it's a wonderful book because it includes perspectives from many different community members and all kinds of people who've been involved in Hmong. So, what a wonderful contribution to the field of Hmong studies. You will see here that I will talk a little bit about just the research and publishing experience. I think that some of you who are younger and who might be interested in, or you may already be working on a book, I hope that a book can never be perfect, right? If we succeed, the works that we publish will energize other people to write more, okay? I think that's the goal. The goal is not to have a perfect book because that was my goal, and then I got to a point where I just decided to be done, and then I was done. Okay. So I hope today to maybe just talk a little bit about, for those of you who don't know me, who are new to my world, I think most of you know me already, but I will tell you just a little bit. Lee Pao said I grew up here in the Twin Cities, went to many different public schools in St. Paul, graduated from Johnson High School, went to Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, got my MA at the Humphrey Institute in '96, worked for some time. So I do have some professional work experience in research and evaluation here, and then decided that I wanted to contribute to producing knowledge about, my people's history in the United States. So went back to get my PhD, and there was no other topic for me to study except, Hmong history, both in Asia and in the United States. So what I hope to do today is, I know some of you probably already publish your own books, right? How many of you are working on something that you will like to publish in the future? Don't be shy. Okay, that's wonderful, okay? That's wonderful because we need to start. If we don't start, it'll never finish, right? Just with anything else in life. So I hope to just share with you a little bit about what the book is about. You've seen the cover page, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that came about as well. Talk a little bit about what it's about, and then talk about the research and writing process, because I think that Lee Pao mentioned that often, we do have more and more Hmong Americans who are researching, writing about Hmong culture, history, all kinds of aspects of Hmong life in the United States, right? However, a lot of the research has been conducted from the outside. And those of us who are conducting research now, we rely so much on those work conducted from the outside in order for us to better understand things that happened many years ago that we have no idea, right? I had to go through the refugee studies collection at the University of Minnesota that Dr. Browning and others collected over the years. I sat there and I love talking to people too, those of you who know me, but I also enjoy talking to papers. So sitting in archives, reading through what were people thinking about, correspondences, what kinds of problems did they encounter, and how did people think about resolving issues. So those documents from the early times are very helpful as well. So talk a little bit about that, and then I will be talking just a bit about the publishing process and how this really came about, because it was an interesting process. In the end, it worked out, and so you're very happy, but the process is always an interesting relationship. How about that? And then I'll read you just a little bit of excerpt from the book, and then I'll, you are welcome to buy a copy, and I would be happy to sign them. But if you don't buy one, I will not be offended. You can check them out at the library as well. Okay, so what this book is about, I think the title, I had a completely different title as I was working. No, I take that back. I had a different title, slightly different, not completely. The Reconstructing Community in Diaspora was really something that came out of my dissertation. I was interested in looking at how people rebuild community in different places in the United States. But I had a different title until the very end, when it was almost ready to for me to hand it over, sort of after the revision process. And I wanted a title that captures what I think I'm writing about. I had other title, but this finally came to me with Hmong America. If we think about the history of Hmong and the history of immigration to the United States, it would be very unlikely for people like Hmong to end up in the United States, right? Without the global politics, without the war, we wouldn't be immigrating to the United States, right? So the fact that we did, I decided to call it Hmong America, in a place, in some ways, sort of embracing a place that America is not just Hmong living here, but that we are Americans now, and that America is our land, as well as other immigrants who have come to this country. So that's how the title came about, and I hope you like it too. I think I like it. I think it sort of captures that, but I'd love to hear about what you think that sort of signifies to you Hmong America, right? Claiming America as ours as well. So the book is about this 20th century global politics that Hmong became entangled, right? So without that, again, Hmong would not even have a chance to be here. But because of these 20th century political transformations throughout the world, not just in the United States or in Europe, but throughout the world, that made it possible for Hmong to end up here. So I begin with that kind of discussion of these political transformations there and how we became entangled. And I think the tribute, which I didn't know was going to take place, but I think it's appropriate, right? Whether we are for or against Vang.m4v, that's not the question. Right? That's not the question. The point is that it was a significant historical moment in Hmong history. When I say moment, I don't mean just today. I mean the moment of the war, 15-something years, or maybe longer for our elders. However, that moment in the 50s and 60s and 70s and even the 80s and to today are very important for us to understand that there was influence, right? And there's a legacy, there's a connection to what occurred in Laos or in Southeast Asia and today. So what the book, sort of problematizes that experience in Southeast Asia, and then I talk about the very reason why these global political struggles made it possible for Hmong to be dispersed all over the world. And for those of you who do Hmong studies, you know that Hmong people are dispersed all over the world. In some ways, it's very much just because of that particular moment during the Vietnam War era. And then I had a little map which Dr. Nicholas Tapp from Australia helped me with some of the numbers. So we created this map of Hmong in the world. You'll see that there's, again, numbers are numbers, right? Even the US Census is always problematic because the margin of error for the larger populations very high as well. But for Hmong, it's even higher. So we have a map of Hmong in the world. You'll see the different pockets, right? We know that the vast majority are still in China, but the Hmong people are little pockets all over the world, including the United States. So I thought that was helpful. I'm a visual learner, so sometimes I like to see things. So I hope that a map like this helps to place where Hmong people live and what are they doing. You will see that in the introduction I talk about how, in terms of my position as a Hmong American, as someone who's traveled to Europe, South America, and lots of different parts in Asia, speaking to different Hmong communities, that makes a difference because I get to compare and contrast the various places in which Hmong live, because the local context make a big difference in terms of how Hmong rebuild or build or make sense of their lives, right? So then I have a map of Hmong in the United States. The 2010 census are not ready yet, so we'll be analyzing some of that data. But just so we have a sense of where people are, they're all over the country, right? And the shifts have changed. We know that the people will resettle in some particular places in the United States, but they may choose to move to a different place, so they're all over the country now. Some people may have moved 3-4 times. Some people may have come to Minnesota and never moved. There are those people who never moved from Minnesota. And this is the first time I have an address outside of the state, and I just went across the border, so. Oh, for those of you who know me, my cell phone is still a 612 number, so that shows how committed I am to Minnesota. Okay, so sometimes with the different types of writing, right? If I'm writing a memoir, I think it's a fascinating genre, right? But I might be writing about my own experiences, I might be writing about my thoughts and perspectives. But when you're writing an academic text, so those of you who know about my Hmong in Minnesota book, that wasn't the book that got me tenure, right? And I have good news. I went up for early tenure this year, and I actually got promoted. So it's only because of, well, not only, but partly because because of the book. So in the discipline of history, I'm sort of categorized in the humanities. So in humanities, if you don't publish a book, in history, you'll never get tenure. So it's a big pressure for professors who are at research universities, because we get a lot of support for research, but then we're also expected to publish. If we don't publish, no matter how smart we think we are, if we don't publish, then no one knows how smart we are. So we never, quite get to where we can convince people that we actually know something valuable. So at any rate, so this kind of academic writing it's really hard. I think for many of us who are second language learners, I was almost 9 when we came, so I'm actually 1.5 generation. I was not born here in the United States, but I think I came at an age that's young enough to, I think most of the time I speak English. So to be able to, embrace the culture here in the United States, and then to also be young enough to learn and be competitive in school. So in academic writing, we always have to come up with an argument, right? And I think, I hate turning my back on people, but I need to see here. So one of the things in a book that in academic people are always asking, well, what is your central question? What is your key argument? What are you trying to say here? And in academic writing, I can tell what I think, but we have to have all kinds of evidence to document and to support what we're saying. So it became sort of a daunting task. I will get to a point where I will talk a little more about the data, but so in the end, this is what I decided to do. Part of it, the research came from my dissertation, but I think the main question I was trying to ask is that different groups come to the United States with different experiences, right? But for the Hmong, how do groups like the Hmong build or rebuild community from scratch? Because there were no Hmong community here. How do you build a community from scratch when you come with very little material resources, but you have a long history of nation building efforts? For those who have studied Hmong, nation building is very important, and people like Vang.m4v and others talk all the time about the importance of land, the importance of a nation, and in terms of citizenship, right? You belong to a nation, then you work hard to promote that nation. So that's what I think in this whole book I try to explore. How do they rebuild community from scratch? And then I also, there's so many questions in the book, but some of the key ones that I try to talk about in the book is how do we, in many ways, how is our sense of community different in the United States and in Laos or in other Asian contexts? And then also looking at what are some of the main points of conflict, because the point of my book is not to write this glorious, revisionist, celebratory book about Hmong in the United States, right? Because I wanted to look at contradictions, conflicts that we have, because we're also humans, and we have interests, we have different layers of community at the larger community, individual, family, and various faith communities as well. So I think what's very important is that my book doesn't just talk about all these wonderful things. It also examines some of the tensions that have existed in the community. And again, there's sort of the many facets of Hmong life in the United States. And then I also look at some of the cultural changes. And in the book, what I try to do is that you'll see that the different topics that I've included were sort of intentionally chosen to illustrate Hmong solidarity, as well as some of the tensions that have existed in the community. So again, it's not to just focus only on some of the great things that are happening, but tensions as well. And so I think part of what I was really trying to argue in this book is that, like many other immigrants, right, we are just another chapter in the United States history. We come, I have said this to those of you who know me, but I read about Norwegians in the 1920s and 30s and some of the issues that they have. They're no different from some of the issues that Hmong Americans experience today, or the tensions that we experience. They're no different. It's just a different, maybe different racial ethnic group, but the kinds of experiences, settlement, migration, it's very similar to those other groups as well. So I think in my book, I try to argue that if you are from an outsider, many of you may not be Hmong, but you live with us, you eat with us, you've engaged, you've gone to our weddings and funerals and soccer tournaments. So you know the community whether or not you're Hmong, right? You don't have to be Hmong to know about Hmong culture and history, right? But I think what I'm trying to say is that for outsiders who don't know the community, sometimes you look at a soccer tournament, right? And you'll say, oh, it's just a sports tournament. Or you look at the New Year and say, oh, it's just a Hmong cultural, event. But when you open those doors and you enter these environments, it's not just a cultural event, right? We see politics, we see business, we see transnational practices of elderly women and men selling herbs. Those of you who are familiar with the community, you know what I'm talking about, right? But for the other 30 million Americans, that's not always true. Hmong always make it to the public consciousness, but it's rare that people really understand why we're here, why we've been immigrating for more than 30 years. So what I'm trying to argue in my book is that Hmong community formation has been really multifaceted, and that in many ways, we didn't come to the United States and then forget about everything that we use in the Asian context. In fact, Hmong use their own social organization structures in many ways to embrace, but yet to also build new communities here. So in some ways, using Hmong social structure and then utilizing whatever is available in the host society to recreate community. And the other argument that I'm trying to make in this book is that I think what's very important for a group like Hmong, the experience of being refugees, the experience of living through the war and then being forced to migrate, that collective identity, right, that shared experience has been a mobilizing factor for Hmong in the United States. Every time there's something that happens into various places in Asia that may affect Hmong, people mobilize, right? People mobilize and they want to take action. They become very politically engaged in that way, not just for their own resources in the United States, but they are also very active in trying to improve the lives of their co-ethnics or the other Hmong people in Asia. So I hope that that's what came through in the book. Now, I just want to tell you a little bit about the content. Again, you'll see in the book that some people have asked me, well, why did you choose that? Why didn't you do this? How come you didn't add this? I said, well, that's for another book, or that's for another scholar to write about, because this book is not everything. It's my take of Hmong community building based on the research that I have conducted and my own analysis. So, of course, many people shared with me their experiences, but the analysis, when it came down to writing, I was spending months in my basement. It's all me. It's all me and my family. So, anyway, so I had to include a chapter on Hmong history, right? Because I wanted to just be American and just begin here in America, but the people who reviewed my manuscript say, oh, you need a history chapter, because if you don't, then nobody will understand, the historical context. So I had to have a history chapter, and then I had a chapter on, how Hmong people find new homes in America, right? So in many places in rural United States, as well as urban communities that Hmong resettle in, sometimes competing for various resources with or against others in American society that in fact have been some of the most disenfranchised. So if you, so one of the things that people like my family and many of your families, we live in housing projects, right? We live in some of the most problematic neighborhoods where we come home from the bus and the kids chase us and we can't go straight to our house. We have to go around the block to get to our house because the kids are calling us all the names that Asian Americans have been called, and knowing that, not knowing that we're not, Chinese or Japanese, but we get the same treatment as well. And then I also talk about how we have recreated our social structure. Some of the most formal organizations are nonprofit organizations that I talk about in the book. Then I also talk about the sort of the rise of the faith community or the religious community. Many of you know that as much as 50% of the Hmong are now Christian. So what does that mean in terms of community for Hmong, right? In the Asian context, it has been thought of as maybe clan, right, or kinship system. But once they come here, many people don't interact with their families anymore. Maybe their church has become their new family or their community. So I examine all of those wonderful tensions that I think Hmong families and others who work with Hmong can relate to. And then I talk about the new year. this is a place that I think it's a great way to examine sort of how culture and traditions are reinvented, right? So we come, there are policies and procedures and laws and regulations that we can't kill a chicken at the New Year, so we let it run around. And sometimes some of the New Year organizers have told me that one year the chicken got loose and it flew all over, and the feather flew everywhere, and so the next year they had to tie the chicken a little bit harder. But it's those kinds of things, right? And then you have, it's not traditional in Hmong society in Asia to have elected officials all sit there in the front and speeches after speeches, but it has become a tradition in Hmong American New Year's, right? Whether I'm in Fresno or in France, or whether I'm in Milwaukee or the Twin Cities, it's becoming a very common practice. So if you don't see that, then it becomes not common for Hmong American traditions, right? So those are some of the things that I talk about. I also talk about gender in the book, and the ways in which women have played a very instrumental role, but I decided not to have a separate chapter on women because I thought it was important to sort of integrate the ways in which women have contributed in the various sectors instead of having a section just on women. And then I can't help but have a chapter on political activism. I talked about this earlier, how I think beginning with Chia Yooyee's election in 1991, 92, that has sort of set in motion many other young Hmong Americans to run for office. And it's no longer just people who may be community leaders, who may be the elders. There are leaders, but the leaders that, especially here in the Twin Cities, many are educating the United States. They don't just represent Hmong. When Mimo ran for the Senate, in fact, there's only one person who was part of the delegates who could vote, and he was voting for another candidate. So in many ways, these are Hmong candidates, Hmong American candidates who are educated here. They understand the issues. They're just as qualified as any other candidates in the community. So they're not a Hmong candidate, they just happen to be Hmong, but they can appeal to a general audience. And I think that's a factor that contributed to many of their successes in the Twin Cities. I do talk about Wisconsin and other states as well, but it's a very different dynamic than here in the Twin Cities. And I'm so blessed to be from here so that I understand some of the dynamics. I think if I weren't from here and my family wasn't from here and I didn't grow up understanding the different dynamics, it'd be a little bit harder to spend just a couple of years to do research and to understand the nuances that have taken place here. And so that's what the content of the book is. I want to read just a brief, I think couple of brief paragraphs for you. And I start with just a paragraph at the introduction, and I'll end with two at the end, so you can figure out what's in between if you are interested. I begin the book with more than 130,000 Hmong people came to the United States as political refugees beginning in the mid-1970s. This book is a story of why they left their country of birth and how they have rebuilt their lives in the diverse places in which they now call home. Although they are one of the ethnic minorities in America that frequently make it to the public consciousness, most Americans have little or no knowledge of who they are and why they have been immigrating to the United States. To better understand this, it is necessary to explore Hmong social, cultural, economic, and political experiences during the 20th century in Asia and their subsequent community-building efforts in the United States in relation to dominant institutions, ideologies, and aesthetics. And so I begin on that, and again, my book, in the introduction, I believe, talk about the fact that I'm not trying to write a nice, book to say that everything is wonderful and to sort of ignore some of the tensions. So I do talk about that piece, but I end the book with something that I hope you like too, because I think it's really important. I mentioned a little bit about how, as people of Asian descent, we come to the United States, and whether you're Japanese or Chinese, you walk down the street, people don't often know the difference. So many Hmong, especially those of us who grew up here in the Twin Cities, we become victims of many racial remarks, and we see that continues to be an issue. But in the early 1980s, when I was a small child here in the Twin Cities, most kids didn't know anything about us, right? They didn't know, so it's not their fault. it's not their fault that they didn't know the difference between Hmong or Vietnamese or Chinese. So if they call me a name that's for Koreans, that's not their fault. Their education is limited too. Even in our K-12 education today, you step out of the metro area and it'd be no different than it was when I was growing up in the early 80s. So I end the book with something that I think many of you are familiar with. As people of Asian descent, they have benefited greatly from the progress that Asian Americans and other racial minorities have made. At the same time, they have also inherited all of the stereotypes about Asian Americans and have become targets of racial violence in urban settings as well as in suburban and rural areas. Reflecting the ways in which people of Hmong ethnicity have been included into American life since their arrival is the Clint Eastwood film, Gran Torino, which was released in December 2008, about a Korean War veteran's interaction with his family and his new Hmong neighbors. Set in Detroit, the cohesive extended Hmong family life is juxtaposed against the breakdown of American family values, where the main character's children and grandchildren are only interested in his material possessions. The film highlights the struggles of a poor, disadvantaged new immigrant group that becomes entangled in the urban pecking order. The film is about Walt Kowalski, played by Clint Eastwood, who sacrifices himself to save the brother and sister pair, Tao and Sue, from their Hmong gangbangers. So then I write a little bit more about how I hope that for those who watch Gran Torino, I have everywhere I go around the country, when people learn that I'm Hmong, they say, oh yeah, I know a lot of Hmong culture. I learned so much from Gran Torino. And so I hope, so one of the things I caution you here is that I hope that Gran Torino does not become sort of the introduction to many people's views about Hmong. That's my hope. So I write about that in the book. And then this is the final paragraph in the book. I said, if one looks back to where the Hmong were in 1975 when the first refugees arrived in the United States and compares it to the vibrant community that exists today, one finds that notwithstanding continuing poverty and discrimination, the Hmong American community has made great strides. What it means to be Hmong in small towns compared to large cities entails a consideration of the larger frameworks that facilitate or hinder the maintenance and invention of Hmong culture and its traditions. One indisputable fact is that Hmong experiences have contributed to the recreating and transforming of societies in which they now live. Not only are they changing their own culture and its traditions in order to exist in American society, but also the unlikely places in which they live, in which they have reconstructed community, have undergone much transformation as a result of their presence. Those who knew them prior to their migration to Western nations fear that they would not survive in these technologically advanced environments. Some even predicted their extinction. However, if the last quarter of the 20th century tells anything about Hmong people's ability to adapt and create meaningful communities, those fears may now be put to rest. History suggests that while Hmong refugees may have traveled a slightly different path to reach America's gates, their experiences of both inclusion and exclusion are similar to those of previous immigrants. Given access to similar opportunities, they too can achieve the American dream. So that's the end of the book. So just quickly, many of you know that this came out of my dissertation. When I finished it, I wrote the Hmong in Minnesota book, which was very well received. I mean, hundreds of people came to the readings, and I think they sold thousands of copies. It's a small book, but high school children can read it, so it was a very, very good project that I'm really proud of. And this book has received, quite a bit of attention too, and I hope that it will make a good contribution to Hmong studies at the higher education level. Quite a few classes have adopted for their class, so I'm just delighted to see that. But you see that I did most of my interviews here in the Twin Cities, but I also did research to add more to the historical documents that I needed to prepare that history chapter. I received a fellowship in spring of 2008 that released me from all teaching responsibilities. So that's a very generous thing to receive as a junior faculty member. For those of you who are faculty members, you know that it's very difficult to have those kinds of help. So I was very fortunate. I won this award, and so I was able to be released from all teaching responsibilities so that I can go do more research and finish my book so that I can potentially get tenure. So I did that. I went to the History of Aviation archive that has all the CIA case records and all the photographs, some of them that I do include in the book, which I think were very important for me. I mean, hearing the voices of the Hmong people who went through the migration is very important, but I think as a historian, it's very important for me to make sure that it's historically accurate. That if someone tells me that in 1961, I've heard people say, or elders, oh, in 1961, President Kennedy came to Laos and told us to do so, such and such. And I said, well, President Kennedy did not come to Laos in 1961, but you know what? Those are some of the rhetoric that maybe they have learned once they come to the United States. So it's not untrue. That's this individual's truth. But as a historian, it's my job to make sure that things are historically accurate. So that's what I try to do in the book. And then I just want to say a couple of things about the publishing experience. It was really interesting for me because I think Hmong is still a hot topic, right? And so I contacted 4 different presses, and in fact, I take that back. I contacted 3. One contacted me, but one of them was so excited about the topic, wanted to add my book to their series. But when I sent her the dissertation, she said, well, it's not a book yet. So she didn't want it. So I got 1 rejection. But then 2 other presses, NYU wanted my book. I met with the editor and they were waiting for me to finish. But as I talk about in the book, I met the series editor from the University of Illinois Press. Roger Daniels, for anybody who studies immigration history in the United States, he's just a big name in immigration history. He's retired now, but he came to Milwaukee. And this is why I think it's important for us, for anyone or for young people, to be prepared and ready, because you just never know who you're going to meet. And you can be so smart, you can have the degree from the highest university in the nation, but sometimes it's just about who you meet and who you know. Right? At the right place at the right time. So Roger Daniels came to Milwaukee, he gave a talk, and when one of my senior colleagues, she introduced me to him, as soon as he heard the word Hmong, he said, you got a book? I said, well, I have my manuscript, my dissertation. He said, send it to me. I was really scared to send it to him because the other editor has, said, oh, it's not a book. But Roger Daniels read my dissertation, and he said, Chia, no, it's not a book, but it has the potential to be a book. So he gave me, 12 pages of feedback about what to change, and that's really the story of how this book came to be. He kind of took me under his wings, and I worked to revise it, and then finally it got to a point where he thought it was good enough. They send it out to external reviewers, and those of you who've published books, you know how this is, but for those of you who may not have, right, it's intimidating. It's intimidating to send your manuscript, your hard 4 or 5 years of your life writing this book, okay, to people who don't know you. They may be experts in the larger field, but they may not be experts in Hmong history, right? And they're gonna have to tell you if your book is worthy to be published. And that's really scary, okay? But they sent it to 2 external reviewers, and they came back with really very good comments. One of them even gave me an A+ for research. I said, do we get graded for a manuscript? I wasn't sure. But anyways, but he also had a lot of things to say, right? So part of what the external reviewers, what their job is to see if it's a good contribution to the larger body of knowledge. So they gave me lots of suggestions. There were comments about how to add this. I need to compare about other Asian American political activism and all kinds of different suggestions that were very good suggestions. But I sat in my office and oh, that's not what my book is about. And then I had to defend myself, and then eventually I defended myself, and the editors were fine with it. They gave me a contract in 2009, and then the book, went through the the publicity, all the marketing pieces. But I do want to tell you a little bit about the cover, though. Okay, and those of you who are from here, and those of you who may be like me, who grew up like my brothers, we grew up on a work at the farmers market, right? So, but this book is not about the farmers market. Okay, so we got to a point where I needed to choose a cover. They asked me for suggestions. I sent them hundreds of photos that the very nice Hmong Today and Hmong Times gave me, right? I said all these options, these are the ones that I really like, and it captures what I'm trying to write in this book. Well, when it got to the point, the publicity director sent me 2 images, right? Not once I sent them, right? 2 images, and he said, "Oh, Chia, we are so excited. We're at the point now where we're ready to, have you choose, one of these covers for your book so that we can get it out to the online catalog as well as get it printed in the Illinois Press catalog." So it was on a Friday. I opened the email. I was so excited, right? I opened the first image. The first image is a beautiful photo of a young Hmong woman. In front of her were vegetables at the farmer's market. I said, no, that's not what this book is about. Okay, so I was a little angry. I said, well, that's not what the book is about. Hmong people are not just farmers and primitive, and we do other things too. And my book is about how they have exercised a lot of agency, even though they're victims of war, they're political refugees, they don't have a lot of power, but they have exercised a lot of agency in making decisions for themselves that in many ways changed all of Hmong history, especially the early refugees who came to this country. So I put that away. I opened the second one, hoping it would be a better image, right? I opened the second image, an elderly couple still at the farmer's market with vegetables in front of them, and then now I'm mad. Okay, now I'm really mad. I said, you know what? This is not what my book is about. If people see the front, they're gonna think I'm writing about Hmong farming and Hmong as farmers, and that's what we've done in generations, and that's what we will continue to do, right? So I wrote a long email to the publicity director outlining all the bullet points about why I didn't think these images. I told her I know that the cover of the book does not tell everything about what's inside. That I know. But here are the reasons why these images don't work for my book. I was really angry, so I didn't send the email. Right? When I'm angry at someone, I don't send them an email. Okay? I wait till Monday. I opened that email again. I still didn't send it to her. Okay? But what I did was pick up the phone. I picked up the phone and I said, I don't think these images work for my book. If you really look at what I've talked about in the book, they're more about Hmong people's desire to get education, to really do something for themselves in this country, and to become, part of the solution, to do things, and to become, Americans in their own rights, right? I talk a lot about the political activism, and there's no farming scenes in those images. So I explained to her, I read all the bullet points that I had written the Friday before, and she said, oh, you know what, Chia? Okay, you're right. I agree. Do you have a suggestion? I said, no, not right now, but can you search more? And so they went and searched, and I think this photograph was taken by, if any of you know who this individual is, I don't, right? It's taken by, it is a student and Lao Families Community Center in St. Paul, okay? So when they sent me this photo, I said, I like that one, because I think it reflects Hmong people's intense desire for education, right? That education was very important to them. If you think of in Hmong history with Tubi Li Fong, was very important to him that Hmong have a village school, that Hmong children go to school. Same thing with Vang.m4v and during the war years. The USAID built schools that Hmong children, more than ever before in our history, went to school. And so this picture, writing the ABCs, was so meaningful to me. And then I chose the red, white, and blue because I think it captures what I believe Hmong's place in America, right? So I like that. I think it works for me, and I think the title is okay. And then the cover makes me happy because it's not, sort of re-articulating that image of Hmong being primitive and farmers, because we have changed in tremendous ways. When I talk about the last paragraph of my book about how some people in fact predicted that we may become extinct. In the 70s, there was a documentary film about Hmong, and you will see, those of you who have seen this film, it's called Becoming American, the Odyssey of a Hmong refugee family. And the narrator talks about the small child on the father's back, right? That that perhaps their race is probably en route to becoming extinct. But all of those predictions have proven wrong because we see the thriving community here, and we have the Center for Hmong Studies and other places that are working very hard to document our history and culture, not just in Asia, but here in the United States. And again, I hope that I look forward to getting feedback. I've gotten some from others who read the book, and some have suggestions for me. I say, well, that's for another book. But really interesting feedback, right? Really interesting feedback. I don't expect everybody to agree with my analysis because it's an academic book. It's part of my job is to, analyze some of the things in the book, the situations, the events that occurred, and not just merely document or describe what happened here and there, but to offer some critical analysis of what it means at the very different junctures. So that's what the book is about. I will end here, and I know that we have some time left. So if you have questions, I did that already. So if you have questions or suggestions, we'll just have a conversation.
We have a microphone. There's a tape in it, so that's always tape on lectures.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming, and secondly, I have to admit I have not yet had the time and the privilege to read the book, so I'm asking this question cold.
Okay.
And that is, as someone who's read much of the literature that's available about Hmong culture and Hmong history, what did you hope to provide in this book that you saw as new, as your own unique contribution to the field?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that in all of our work, we are who we are, and the kinds of perspectives and the kinds of analyses that we provide, often, that's what the data says, right? But what does it mean? Right? What does it mean? I think part of what I have done in this book is to offer those interpretations of what particular moments that I cover, what they mean for the Hmong American community, because it's very easy to describe how in 1997 there was a dedication, a memorial at Arlington National Cemetery for Hmong and Lao veterans, right? To others, it may just be another, other Asian Americans, other people of color have fought in various wars throughout American history that are still fighting for recognition. But what this means for the Hmong, interestingly, is that they were fighting for America before they were even in America. But interestingly, because of their strategic or interesting dynamics in advocacy work, have resulted in a memorial for Hmong and Lao. So what that means for the community is very different from what I think if you just go to Washington, D.C. and you look at the memorial, that's what it is. But there's a longer history to that. And so I think that's what I have done in this book, and the contribution I make it is that from inside the community. I mean, when I was younger, I used to attend a lot of meetings, right? I was one of those curious children who listened and went to see what the elders were talking about and questioned some of them sometimes, actually, if they were doing things that I thought, well, how come there are no women who are candidates at the Lao family election? I would say, how come there's no women candidates? Is it because no one wants to volunteer, or is it because no one nominated them? So, or is it because the women themselves don't want to be a part of it? So I think that's what my book contributes to this body of literature on Hmong. And you have read my book.
I have actually, yes. I'm assigning the class the book for my class this semester, so I've actually read the book. And in some ways, I think part of the answers to Paul's question, I think, and this is something that I see that you have done beautifully in this book, is to emphasize Hmong agency consistently throughout the book. And this is something that may be a part of your contribution to the field, right? Because in some ways I see that you are arguing against this framework of victimizations to portray, even when people are talking about this concept of refugees, and you talk a great deal about this concept of refugees and how Hmong have in some ways expressed or exercised agency, even in using the concept of refugees to argue for all kinds of resources in this country. And so in some ways this is part of the contribution. And in the introduction you sort of set out to use diaspora, or the diaspora as a theoretical framework for analyzing a lot of the experiences of the Hmong in the United States. But throughout the book, in some ways, I'm struggling with how the diasporic framework it's used in the book, and it seems like that framework is not highlighted or it's missing in the book. So perhaps you can help us understand how this diasporic framework it's used in the book, and
Sure.
help us understand what that framework is about.
That's a really good question, because I think the term is, it means a dispersal of people, and it's been used by many other scholars to study the Jews, African Americans. There's African American diaspora studies. So part of what I was trying to do is I tried to create a definition about why diaspora works for the Hmong. And I think the definition I offer is that there needs to be that historic injustice moment in their history that they can refer to as a reason why they have to become dispersed, right? So I know that other scholars will argue that, well, actually the great injustice was that migration from China. I said that's true. That's very true as well. The dispersal happened from China, but really in Hmong America's memory, right? That migration wasn't documented. The ways in which this migration is documented in film, in letters, in cassettes, and we know it too well, right? So I think that's the difference that I'm trying to set out. And I think diaspora works because although I don't continue to weave that throughout the book, I think part of what I was trying to show is that the diaspora, it doesn't just mean that there are people in other parts of the world. That within the United States, Hmong people are dispersed throughout the United States. So I talk about small community in Philadelphia area with just 6 families that have are happy there. They don't want to move. They're sad. They're part of that community, but they're their own little community, right? And then big communities like here in Fresno, I talk about places I visited in the South. The people who have gone down to buy chicken farms, chicken farmers. The poultry industry. So I think the diaspora framework works for me in that sense, that it's not just this idea of people being dispersed to different nations, right? But I think within the nation of America, you have people being dispersed to different places. And you see how people build community in a large concentration here is very different in a sense from other communities. But what is not so different is that even that 6 families, they have their own Hmong New Year celebration every year. It's just that it's a small community. But then you have places like here where you have 20,000 people walk through the New Year. In Milwaukee, you may have just 2,000, right? So I think that framework, that's how I'm using it. And I think I agree with you. I think I focus more on the term community than the diaspora. But I think that diaspora is the result of being dispersed. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Maybe that's also part of the contribution to this whole concept of diaspora, right? Because when we think about diaspora, we often think about sort of a homeland somewhere in the Asian context, but here you're talking about the dispersal within the United States itself.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's a revision or a contribution to this new, to this concept of diaspora.
Good. I will say that next time.
Any other questions? Let's go right up front and we'll go.
I wanted to ask about the publishing process and how I think a lot of times you hear on TV about people writing books and in the trade market and getting these big signing bonuses and people think when you write a book sometimes you're going to make a lot of money. I just wanted to see if you could talk about the difference in academic publishing and what that's like. I guess the financial aspect of it.
Sure. Okay, that's a very good question because please don't come and ask me for any money. I won't have any to give you. I would encourage you to go ask Jerry Yang. He's such a nice man, the world poker champion. I met him in Oshkosh a couple of weeks ago. He came to talk to the students, so we both went to talk to students there. But it's a very different process, right? In publishing, there's so many different ways, and nowadays with technology, things are changing the landscape of publishing tremendously. So for like the Hmong in Minnesota book, it was commissioned, right? So they gave me some money up front. I wrote it, they published it. I don't make any money from it because they paid me to write the book already. And then for academic books, it depends, right? Each press is a little bit different, but I think generally, and others feel free to contribute to this question as well. For this, then I get a certain percentage of books that they sell, okay? Just a very small percentage. Very small. I emphasize very small. But I think it's not so much about the money that we get, but it's the credentials, the credibility, the ability to, we hope that someone will publish our work, right? We hope that someone thinks it's worthy to be part of their, their series. So it's not about money. I think for academics, especially those of us in research universities, again, if you don't publish, you can't be tenured. And if I ever want to become a full professor, I better get going on writing that third and fourth book, or else that's not going to be a potential path. So it's not a lot of money. We get I think like 10% of the sales that they make, which is very small. Not a whole lot. It's just enough to buy myself a pair of shoes or soccer shoes for my kids. So that's about it. But it is very different. It just depends. And many people could self-publish, right? But then I don't do any of the marketing. Maybe I have friends like Li Pao and others who hold events for me. But the press, they do all of that. I don't do any of that. If you self-publish, then you are the editor, the designer, and you make all decisions. You have to go out. But nowadays, the presses aren't doing as much anymore. I have learned from colleagues. They don't have fun events for you to go to. Maybe in the past they did, but it's a little bit different dynamic now. So I do have a lot of events that people are just holding for me because I just am fortunate to have friends in different places, not in high places with money, but in different places that think it's important to document, to write about Hmong, and to talk about our experiences. So not a whole lot of money, but it is a wonderful, interesting learning process because I think of all the data I've collected, I actually could write 2 more books, which one I am beginning to, but I can't quite tell you yet which one that is because I'm torn between 2 different topics. These are rich data that I think should be archived for others to potentially use in the future for other projects.
So I also read your book, and I wanted to say that I really appreciated actually the chapter, the historical chapter, and would agree with the editor of the A+ on Facebook. And I think one of the reasons why it was so important for me is through your historical tracings, it really helped me understand the uniqueness of the diaspora. So sort of piggybacking on Herbank's question, can you talk a bit about how the diaspora is really unique in the U.S. for Hmong?
Sure. Herb began that process already to respond to your question. What's unique is that the idea of diaspora, right, is that there's a homeland, you get dispersed, and you are yearning for that homeland, right, and a return to that homeland. But what is home to Hmong people is problematic, right? Especially Hmong Americans. I do talk about the generational differences, right? Maybe for some very, the elderly who are much more attached to Hmong history through their oral learnings from their elders, they may really believe that China is the homeland, right? But I think for many immigrant generation, it's Laos, right? It's Laos that Hmong people most recently came from, so that homeland is there. But for many second generation, our children, our future children, it may just be St. Paul. It may just be Detroit, Providence, Paris. So those homelands are very different for other dispersed groups. There are other dispersed groups, other diasporas that don't have nation states, physical, geographic nation states that they can return to as well. But I think in particular for Hmong, that concept of just being dispersed from China and then being even more dispersed throughout Southeast Asia, it's very unique in that sense that there isn't that shared idea exactly or agreement of what that homeland is, right? I talk a little bit about when I went back to Laos, it's my home, right? It's the place in which I was born, it's the life that I was born to live. I met my cousins and they're a little bit younger than I am. I'm not saying my life is any better. I actually have more worries than they do. But what I'm saying is that our lives are very different, right? And that's the life I was born to lead. And my cousins' lives are just in that village. And my life was supposed to be that life. But my life is very different now. But I'm not saying it's better, it's just different than that life that I was born to live. So I think that's a little bit unique, right? I go there and I don't feel home, right? Only when I'm in the Hmong village, then people come and talk to me, and elderly people who don't know me invite me to their homes. Or when I went to meet my aunts and uncles, they have lots of stories to tell me about me, which I have no memory of. Then it becomes, much more personal. But I think as the nation itself, it's very problematic. So I think that's the uniqueness about the Hmong dispersal, is that there isn't that agreed homeland that people can return to and say, I'm coming home.
Questions?
He wants to test my Hmong language skills. I will show you my Hmong language skills in a second, and I'm going to just quickly summarize what he asked. Just a very nice comment to say that, I'm a sister and they're proud of the accomplishments, and also my younger sister Mo has a PhD degree. She lives in Sacramento now, so just saying how proud they are of us, which we're always thankful. And then my brothers, my brothers, Chance and Tang are here. They're my big brothers who we came to the U.S. together, but they were a little bit older than I am, and my sister. So we're a little bit more crazy. We love school more, and everybody went to college, but we're the only two that went to get graduate degrees. So my brother Tang and Chance are here. My mother it's my mother-in-law actually. She's a big supporter. You'll read a little bit about her in the thank yous. And then my sister-in-law Melia is here too. I often in these professional meetings, I never invite my family, and today I just decided, why not? So I invited them to come, and it's so nice of them to come. And then your question about writing, because a while ago you had a meeting at Hmong American Partnership, and young people were discussing how do they know they're Hmong, right? And his question is, when I was writing this, because I'm bilingual, in some ways he's trying to ask me if I dream in Hmong or English, right? But why did I choose to write in English, and then do I expect to write it in Hmong? And I think the first answer is that I have to write in English to get it published, and it's for my academic record, so that someone out there would think that I actually have something important to say. If I wrote it in Hmong, then unfortunately, most people who are reviewing these will not be able to read and write Hmong to give me the feedback, to give me the A+ that one person did. So writing in English is very important, because that's the language of dissemination. That's the language that people, not just here in the United States, but across the world are reading. I saw on the list that the publisher sent to me that people in Japan have bought, in Germany, and I think some other places too. So it's very interesting. They are interested in Hmong people in the United States, not just Americans. So I think the language is very important. But your question about writing in Hmong, I do know how to speak Hmong, reading, write Hmong very well, but for this particular moment in my life, I don't think I can take on a task to translate this whole book into Hmong, because there's just a lot, and with teaching and research, I think it's very important. Maybe that's something that we can help some of you who may be interested in translating this. I could help out, but we could find some resources to do that. I think it's an important contribution, important resources, because Hmong language is being taught in a lot of high schools, colleges, and universities. And one of the struggles is that there lacks a lot of resources for them to read in Hmong language. So cái báo của Hmong lên thì của tế các Hmong lên nữa. Thọ của shop phong đó nó thì khởi trình chính xác của chủ tàu số lượng anh ký cho khỏi vì ta số lượng anh ký thì cho tốt nên cái bối nhện bối sai hay ta mua nông cái hết chỉ mua bối chủ cho sai bối chỉ mong bối chỉ cho nhện đó là mong thì yêu chủ sông đó America thì bối sang đi tàu cho khỏi vì ta cho hay tốt nên nhau không ra tên nó lên từ là những cái loại ký nè thì giờ bây sau lượng anh ký thì lo được hay tốt nên bối giờ chỉ mong là bối bảo chủ bây hay tốt nên mong hết khó cũng sao mà ông có hay nhìn vô hay như ta bé mong nó bảo rồi mong là yên tấu tới giờ bên trái nha tới đời ít xa mấy chỗ không nhiều họ băng mua chạy ô mong bị chạy ô mong đó em mong lên thứ giờ sụt là xe lên tàu nhìn giống của sang ta không nói rất khó chỉnh chính hiện như ta mua bình sử nhớ lên từ mua bình sử lưu bán chạy là của yên mua lưu xa trong băng từ tôi nên cái chạy này. Oh, yeah. Good question. When I was writing, the question was, when I was writing, did I ever think about how perhaps if I wrote it in Hmong language, it would be more clear? I think thầu của show phần đó nó cũng mà cũng hiện tại tôi nên cái tôi luôn thì cho nó nè, để cũng như cha luôn mong rằng cũng như là lúc hai luôn mong ha, để chỉ cũng hai luôn anh kỹ tao trang để cái cũng hai luôn mong nè, okay? I actually speak more English than I do Hmong. And I also am very fluent in French. And so when I was in France, I began to think about, I dreamt a few times in French. Sometimes when I dream, it's a mixture of a variety of things. So thầu của shop đó nó cũng chỉ cho sáng hạt tại sau luôn mong yếu mix luôn. Vì hạt tại cho luôn cũng sĩ của nó nè, cái theories nè, okay? Tên đó như luôn mong chỉ tao mua. Để quý chủ tàu sĩ luôn anh ký, để quý chỉ sáng hạt tại, giờ quý sau luôn mong chế tên chế quý sau chỉ tàu lúc sĩ hạt đó nè, quý sau chỉ tàu mấy mẫu để cởi quý sau luôn anh ký, để sĩ giờ tại bé không muốn xài luôn mong, để như vậy lúc sĩ hạt cởi bé cô băng sĩ luôn mong cô muốn cái theories là cho luôn chỉnh chỉnh cởi bé sĩ sau nó nè, lưu sĩ luôn mong hạt tên là nhà bé chỉ trả đi cho luôn mong trang gì. So maybe we'll have more Hmong vocabulary if we did translate this into Hmong.
I had more of a comment than a question, and I just wanted to commend you on your presentation because I think the things that you presented really covers a cross-section of those who are in attendance. I appreciated a lot of your honesty in terms of your reasons for writing, the motivation along with expectations for, publish or perish type of thing. Also appreciated the fact that you talked about the failures and the successes, because among this group, there would be people who are aspiring to do that. And I think you probably have been very intentional to be sure to share some of those true experiences, some of those challenges, but also aspiring people that they can turn even a requirement into something that is meaningful for you, for your culture, and how it can really make significant contributions. But even the sharing about, what it requires to publish and the costs and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to commend you on including all of those aspects as well as the knowledge and history of the culture.
Thank you. One of the questions I always ask young people is, to think about why hasn't there been a lot of, writing by Hmong people, right? And wherever I go, sometimes people say, why did this non-Hmong person write about Hmong? Why can't Hmong people write this? And one of the challenges is that we do have a generation older than I am who were educated, but English may not be their first or second language. It may be their third or fourth. And so it's very hard to write in English. I have to admit, it's so hard to write in English. And it's just something that you have to do over and over again, right? So one of the things I always challenge students to think about is that, well, now we have a new generation of young Hmong people who are educating this country, who had the opportunity to learn English. We have a handful of young people who I have met across the country. I mean, others like Vang, who just finished his PhD, and others in California, Harvard, other places that I think I'm really excited. They write, if I read their writing, I wouldn't know they were Hmong. It's a whole new generation of young people who are trained in this country. They're at some of the most elite universities in the country, and they're doing great work. And I look forward to those people tearing this apart and writing more books.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to say something. I read your dissertation, but I haven't read this. Oh, I'm sorry. Sure. I haven't read this yet, and I look forward to it because I can see already from what you said the kinds of things that you've contributed through your further research. It sounds great. I was interested also in what you said about the diaspora, and I'm wondering, I haven't read this, and I don't know how much you address it, but I've always been impressed by the ability of Hmong people to organize together and to, through that organization, to adapt to the conditions that they face. Because there's been so much to adapt to over the whole of the 20th century with the political situation in Laos, and then with the migration, and then establishing communities here. And one way that I see that Hmong are unique and different perhaps from some other immigrant groups is just that ability to work together when needed and to find solutions to things. You talked about the Hmong at the marketplace, and I agree entirely with what you said, and yet that's quite an accomplishment of the Hmong to find what they could do to, maybe with limited English and so on, to be able to make a living and make a contribution. From the Native American side, I see that, they've made such a contribution to things like the farmers markets and the, recreation of University Avenue through all of the shops that have been built, of people who really were not shopkeepers in Laos, like maybe Vietnamese or Chinese were in their homelands, but the Hmong have moved into new opportunities that suited their needs and also contributed to American society. I just wanted to ask about one thing. Do you feel that in the diaspora that there's a difference in the 20th and especially now maybe in the 21st century because of communication possibilities? In old times, people were dispersed because of having to leave their homeland, and they sort of lost touch with the homeland and with other people to a greater extent than now. And now ways of keeping in touch so that you're in touch with not only electronically, but by being able to fly to another country. Mm-hmm. There are communications. So I wonder if you touch on that in your book.
Mm-hmm. I do a little, but just a quick point about your question about adaptation. I think that's part of my argument, right? Hmong have adapted in ways that were important to them, that they needed to adapt. But in some ways, Hmong had sort of helped to reinvent or change the environments in which they live, right? So talk about Hmong Town Market, for example. You go in there, and if you remember what that was before, right? Just a boarded up building. It wasn't used for anything meaningful, and then now it's a lively place. So you take the Hmong out, and it may still be that physical landscape is not very appealing, right? But now it's vibrant. People go there. I go there. I'm seeing more and more non-Hmong people visit there. It's sort of a destination for people who come here or who might be interested in diversity or Hmong in particular. So I think they're adapting, but yet it's not a complete assimilation model. That's not what I talk about. It's about taking bits and pieces of what's useful in this country, but yeah, using their own social skills or social structure to rebuild those communities. Even in nonprofit organizations, in the beginning, they came together across client lines, but as the community got bigger, then different interest groups came about, and people have different organizations that address very particular issues. The issue about globalization, I do talk a little bit about that. I think that what's very important now is that for the immigrant generation, I think that the departure was horrific for many people, so there's not that desire to go back. But there has always been a group that migrated back and forth. So we can't deny that. Many people, New Year's, you see the airfare, you have 30 Hmong people on a plane going to the Hmong New Year in Laos. So it's a very different dynamic now. Also, we have academic programs. I mean, Lee Paul leads a group, and I've been there twice with students. So, and Paul has been there too, and some of you have probably been there as well. And I think that's a really good point. And I barely touched it because the book is about community building here. But I do end with talking about what this 21st century really means for Hmong, because the ties were kind of cut off for years. But then now with technology, my cousin in Vang.m4v Laos has a nicer cell phone than I do. And he still wants me to buy him a cell phone. I showed him how nice mine was, a Samsung, just a T-Mobile phone. And then he could download things and he had music. But it's that idea that I think most immigrants, you leave the homeland, and you think that you change because you have been enlightened, you've seen many more things, and that the people you leave behind are stuck in time and that they don't change. But what is not true is when you go visit places in Laos, and I know many of you have visited, is that people are not stuck in time. There are no Hmong people dressing in Hmong clothes running around. I mean, in New Year's they do, but now people wear, kind of mainstream Lao clothes, and they go to school. So it's a very different dynamic. They can email us. When we're in Laos and Vietnam, you see that young people are on the internet. They know more about Hmong Americans than sometimes Hmong Americans know about themselves. They know who's popular. They know things I don't even know. So I think globalization, technology, the ease of communication has really changed the ways in which Hmong relate to each other. But I also talk about some of the problems with that as well. I know that many of you who are Hmong, if you visited your relatives once, you get phone calls at 3, 4 in the morning, and everybody wants you to send them money. So that's one thing, that there's this idea of America as a place with great wealth, and that if you come from America, then even if they're not related, they'll keep calling and that we will send them money. But what they will find out is that most of us don't have that kind of money to send to everyone. You support your family a little bit. But I think that communication and the fact that many Hmong women and men are marrying Hmong from Laos, many do come here and they do now have a better idea of our life in the United States, a little bit more than in the past where it was mostly people here going there. But now you have a lot of people that have married Hmong Americans. So the knowledge base is very different now than it was before. If a Hmong American goes back to Laos, it's not viewed the same as it was in the 90s, right? It's a very different dynamic now. And the Hmong population there, I think many have assimilated a great deal. I meet Hmong Lao people in Laos who don't speak Hmong. And my mediocre Lao language gets us nowhere. So it's a very different dynamic, but they are communicating, they're on YouTube, they're on Google all the time. So you have all these computer stores where they can come every day and use the internet. So they're changing as well as almost at the same rate as we are, because they're a lot of young people don't want to live like here in the United States. Small farms are dying because young people don't want to stay in them anymore. In Laos and other places in Asia, it's the same thing. Young people want to go to work in factories because for the $1 they can earn is much more than living on the farm with no opportunities. So it is completely a big factor in how we interact with Hmong in Asia.
Questions? All right, so we're approaching 7 o'clock, and any last thoughts? No? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And the book is for sale there, so if you want your autograph copy, definitely head on to the table there.
Oh, it's true.